Then guys, so in this video I want to have a look at what drugs are, the effects of certain drugs, different types of drugs. I want to have a look at ethics regarding things like transplants. We're going to look at pathogens, and we're going to look at how we can test new antibiotics and antiseptics. Okay, so to begin with, let's get a couple of definitions out of the way. So a drug, okay, in order for you to pass your GCSEs, you need to define a drug as a chemical that affects the central nervous system. So a drug is a chemical that affects the central nervous system. The central nervous system, if I can spell, system. Okay. Now, certain drugs, remember, a drug is a chemical that affects the central nervous system, the central nervous system being the brain and the spinal cord. Certain drugs can lead to addiction. Okay, so certain drugs can lead to addiction. Now, addiction is defined as when a person can no longer function properly without a drug. So addiction is defined as when a person can no longer function properly without taking the drug. Okay. Now, those of you that see me around school and know me on a daily basis see that I drink a lot of caffeine. If I don't drink caffeine, I get really bad headaches. My body does not function the way that it should. Therefore, I'm addicted to caffeine. Caffeine is a drug. It changes the central nervous system in my body. Therefore, it is defined as a drug. Okay? And I'm addicted to it. I can't function properly without it. Another drug that EdExcel would like you to know about is smoking. Smoking is a drug. Just because it's legal does not mean that it's not a drug. So I'll draw us a nice little cigarette here, because as my classes probably know, I like drawing. So cigarettes are a drug. Smoking is a drug. Okay, but there's certain chemicals inside tobacco that makes it harmful. It can kill us. It does kill you. Okay, eventually the majority of people who smoke die at some point. That's because smoking contains certain drugs such as carbon monoxide, which is something that kills people when they have a gas leak. We have nicotine, which is the addictive aspect of smoking. So nicotine. And we also have certain things such as tar, which are deemed as carcinogens. Okay. Now, carbon monoxide, which is CO, carbon peroxide, carbon monoxide, reduces the amount of oxygen our red blood cells can carry. So obviously I don't need to tell you that that's very bad for us. Nicotine is the addictive part of smoking. It's the nicotine in cigarettes that makes you addicted to the drug. Okay? And carcinogens are chemicals that cause cancer. Okay? So carcinogens are any chemicals that cause cancer. Now, these aren't a key word. This isn't a key word, rather. But it's certainly worth knowing in case it comes up in a question. So carcinogens are any chemicals that cause cancer. And it's common knowledge now that smoking has lots of carcinogens in, and it can cause lots of problems, including cancer. Okay? Now, there are different types of drugs. There are different types of drugs, and you need to be able to explain the difference between many of them. Okay? So let's have a quick look at drugs. Okay, some different types. First type of drug I want you to know about, or EdExcel wants you to know about, are painkillers. Okay, painkillers. Now, painkillers include things like morphine, okay? And what they do is they block nerve impulses from pain receptors. So, painkillers block nerve impulses from pain receptors. Now, if you think back to previous videos, we spoke about the reflex arc, and we said that receptors are things in the skin that detect stimuli, and they send impulses, electrical impulses, along neurons, nerve cells. Okay, and the reason you have these pain receptors and the reason that they send messages to nerve impulses is so that you don't damage your body. So if you are taking painkillers for fun, recreationally, which we'll talk about in a moment, then you are far more likely to cause damage to yourself. Okay, so if you're taking things like, I don't know, ketamine, which is horse tranquilizers, you're far more likely to damage your body. You're far more likely to get into situations where you're going to hurt yourself. But in certain situations, drugs such as morphine, which we'll write underneath in yellow as an example, so morphine, these are often given to people who are in dire need of pain relief. So people with cancer, often people who are dying with cancer, they're terminally ill, are given morphine to sort of ease the pain. So these painkillers are a godsend, but at the same time, so long as they're taken sensibly. Another drug, which I could not live without, are stimulants. Stimulants. And these include things like caffeine from coffee. Okay? Caffeine. Just work out how to spell that because I don't know how. Caffeine. Okay? Now, stimulants increase neurotransmitters across synapses. Okay? So these increase the release of neurotransmitters across synapses. Okay, so think back to a few videos ago and we spoke about the synapse, and we said that when an electrical message gets to the end of a neuron, it has to cross a synapse, which is a gap between two neurons, and therefore there is neurotransmitters released which passes the message on to the next neuron. Okay, so stimulants such as caffeine increase the release of these neurotransmitters across the synapses, and by doing that, what they actually do is they reduce your reaction time. So these reduce reaction time. So you react quicker, you have faster reactions. Think of if you're drinking Red Bull, that has a lot of caffeine in, and when you're drinking Red Bull, you feel energetic, you feel lively. Okay? Now, the opposite of a stimulant would be a depressant. Okay? Depressants. Now, depressants include things like alcohol. Okay, alcohol. Now, alcohol, again, although it's legal, it is still a drug. Okay, we're going to talk about that a bit later. But alcohol is a depressant. Okay. Now, depressants slow the activity of the brain. So these slow the activity of the brain. And therefore, instead of speeding up reaction time, they slow down reaction time. So these increase reaction time. It takes longer for you to do something. So these increase reaction time. Okay? So if you are taking depressant drugs, it takes you longer to respond to your environment. It takes you longer to do things. Whereas if you're taking a stimulant, you react quicker and you get things done quickly. Okay? Another one that you need to know about, and I'm certainly going to have to look at how we spell this, are hallucinogens. So hallucinogens. Okay? Hallucinogens. Now, these include drugs such as LSD. Okay? LSD. Now, hallucinogens are drugs that change your perception. So these change your perception. So perhaps you see things that you wouldn't usually see. Okay? Perhaps you see colours, you hear things or whatever. So they can make colours seem brighter, they can make sounds sound louder, they can make you see things that perhaps aren't there. Okay? Now, the important thing that EdExcel want you to know about hallucinogens is these make it difficult, so it makes it difficult to tell what's real and what's not. So these make it difficult to tell what's real or not. Okay? So hallucinogens change your perception. You'll see things differently. You'll perhaps see things that aren't there. And it makes it very difficult to tell what's real and what's not. Okay? Now, there are some other keywords which I'm going to give you as extras. Legal drugs. So, legal drugs. Basically, these are drugs that you can buy in shops. Okay, if you can go to Tesco and buy it and it changes the effect of your central nervous system, it is a legal drug. Okay, so legal drugs are not against the law. So, for example, drugs such as caffeine and alcohol are legal in the UK. In the UK, it is legal to have these drugs. On the other hand, illegal drugs are drugs that are against the law to have. So things like LSD. Okay, LSD is an illegal drug. So these are against the law. You can get arrested for it. Now, a traditional question you can get asked on any test is morphine a legal or illegal drug? Explain your answer. Now, morphine has a very grey area. It is legal to have it with a prescription. A doctor could prescribe morphine, but it is illegal to have it without a prescription. If you buy it from some dodgy bloke up the pub, then obviously it's against the law. They are not a doctor. Okay? Another keyword that I want to put in just to make sure you know it is recreational. Recreational. Now, recreational drugs are drugs that are taken for fun. So recreational drugs are drugs taken for fun. So, things like marijuana. People smoke marijuana for fun, but at the same, LSD is taken for fun. Alcohol is taken for fun. Caffeine is recreational, it's taken for fun. On the other hand, you can have things known as medicinal drugs. Okay? Now, medicinal drugs are prescribed by a doctor and are taken for medical reasons. Okay? So, medicinal drugs are taken for medical reasons. Things like steroids can be both medicinal if they're prescribed by a doctor, and they can be recreational if someone buys them from some dodgy bloke at the gym. Okay? Now, these are some extras. These aren't in your spec, but if you are talking about drugs in a test and you mention, morphine can be legal if it's prescribed by a drug and by a doctor, and it can be illegal if it's bought off some dodgy bloke around the corner. Okay? Traditionally, pupils tend to struggle with this idea of legal and illegal. You either get it or you don't. My advice would be, if you can buy it from Tesco, it is legal. If you can't buy it from Tesco, it's illegal, okay? Because you can't buy cocaine from Tesco, yeah? But you can buy cigarettes from Tesco. That's because cigarettes are legal, cocaine is illegal, okay? Recreational is if it's taken for fun. So, for example, performance-enhancing drugs are taken for fun. They're taken by athletes, whereas medicinal drugs need to be prescribed by a doctor, okay? So, as always, let's have a quick look at some of these worked examples. Now, this question says, a study of all the American men who were 40 in 2004 looked at the number of deaths before 2005. It separated the results into smokers and non-smokers. It showed that compared with non-smokers, 7 times as many smokers died of heart disease, 4 times as many smokers died of lung cancer, but an equal number died after an accident. Now, what we're looking at here is something called correlation. Correlation, you may have heard that in maths. What this is saying is, as one factor changes, the other factor changes. So, for example, as one increases, so does the other. So, as the fact that they smoke increases, the fact that they died of heart disease and lung cancer also increased. Sometimes, especially when we come to look at chemistry or physics or any other data, you'll see that as one goes up, the other one can go down. That would still show a correlation. This shows a positive correlation. As one goes up, the other one does. Now, the pupil has said, the data suggests that smoking is correlated to an increased risk of heart disease and of lung cancer, but not an increased risk of fatal accident. As the results come from a large sample of men, they should be given a reliable picture. Now, this is another thing. When we're looking at drugs and we're looking at data, graphs or investigations into people, we need to make sure that the sample is large. Okay, if the sample is not large, then it could be unreliable. We only accept large samples. If it's a sample of 3 people, then we do not accept it. Okay. So, on the screen now are some some questions. What I would like you to do is I'd like you to pause the video and either talk to someone next to you or get a piece of paper and write down the answers, and we'll start the video again in a moment and discuss what you've put. So, the first question says, describe the effect of caffeine on reaction time. Explain your answer. 3 marks. So it's got a 2-part, there's 2 parts to this question. It's got 2 command words. First of all, they want you to describe, and then they want you to explain. So by describing, you'll get 1 mark. For explaining, you'll get 2 marks. In total, 3. So describe the effect of caffeine on reaction time. You should have said that caffeine reduces reaction time. You react quicker, so the time in which you react is smaller. 1 mark. You get another mark for saying that caffeine is a stimulant, and your third mark for saying that that causes you to respond more quickly. So caffeine reduces reaction time, 1 mark, and then the explain is because caffeine is a stimulant and it causes you to react more quickly. Second question, explain why many smokers find it hard to give up smoking, 2 marks. Now, we said in the first part of this video that nicotine is the part of cigarettes that is addictive. So nicotine is highly addictive. Okay, so 1 mark for mentioning nicotine that is in a cigarette. Second mark for saying that it's addictive. Okay, so remember, addiction means that your body will not function properly without it. So people who are addicted to smoking will not get their body to respond properly without having nicotine. Third question, which is between grade C and A star. Expectant mothers, so people who are pregnant, who smoke are more likely to give birth to babies of a lower weight than non-smokers. Explain why this happens. 4 marks. Okay. Now, if you look back to when we spoke about smoking, we said that tobacco smoke contains carbon monoxide. 1 mark. 1 mark for saying that it contains carbon monoxide. Second mark for saying this diffuses into the blood and affects the amount of oxygen blood cells can carry. So there's carbon monoxide in cigarettes. This reduces the amount of oxygen red blood cells can carry. Third mark, therefore, there is less oxygen getting to the baby, the fetus. So 1 mark, carbon monoxide in cigarettes. 2 mark for saying that this reduces the amount of oxygen blood can carry. 3 mark for saying that this reduces the amount of oxygen given to the baby. And then 4th mark for saying, as a result, the baby's growth is reduced. Okay? If there are any of these questions that you do not get, please feel free to come and find me and we'll discuss them. Okay? So let's have a look at the next bit. Next bit should be fairly quick. Okay? So one drug that EdExcel want you to really look at is alcohol. Okay? Now, alcohol, as we said earlier, is a depressant drug. So alcohol is a recreational, legal, and depressant drug. Okay? So alcohol is taken for fun. It's legal, you can have it, but it's a depressant. And depressants slow the activity of the brain. Okay? Now, we could look at alcohol and we could say that it's got both short-term effects and long-term effects. Okay? The short-term effects of alcohol, so short-term effects, so these are the short-term effects of alcohol, and we've got the long-term effects of alcohol. Okay? The short-term effects of alcohol include things like blurred vision, so blurred vision. We have things such as slow reactions, because it's a depressant drug, remember? So you have slowed reactions. And we also have lowered inhibitions. Okay? Now, what we mean by this, let me just spell it, inhibitions. What we mean by this is the fact that you're more likely to take risks, okay? You're more likely to take risks when you've had a lot of alcohol. So lowered inhibition means you're more likely to take risks. So essentially, you're more likely to get hurt with the short-term effects of alcohol. Because you have blurred vision, because you have these slow reactions, and because you have lowered inhibitions, you're more likely to take risks. These things joined together result in you being more likely to have an accident. Okay? This is why you are not supposed to drink and drive, because your reaction time is slowed. You can't press the brakes, you can't respond to things that happen. Your vision is blurry, so you can't really see the road, and you're more likely to take risks. You're more likely to run red lights or cut people up in traffic, and therefore you're more likely to have an accident. If we add these things together, you are far more likely to have an accident. Okay? So a lot of people who get hurt or sometimes die in the short term due to alcohol is because of these three things. So in the short term, you're more likely to have an accident. Okay? Now, alcohol also has some long-term effects. Alcohol can cause brain damage. If you drink lots of alcohol over many years, you can cause brain damage. Okay? Brain damage. You can also get something called cirrhosis of the liver. Cirrhosis of the liver. Now, cirrhosis is spelled Cirrhosis. Cirrhosis of the liver. Okay? And what this is your liver gets lots of scars on it. Okay? So your liver becomes highly scarred. So your liver becomes highly scarred. Highly scarred. Okay? Now, your liver, what it actually does is it cleans your blood. Okay? As your blood flows around your body, it cleans it. It's also used in protein synthesis for those of you that have done B2. Okay? Now, cirrhosis of the liver means that your liver becomes really scarred and inflamed. So it swells, okay? And what this means is it can no longer clean your blood as well. So even though alcohol is a recreational drug, it's taken for fun, and obviously a lot of people like to drink, it's legal, okay? If you are walking down the street, and provided you're over the age of 18, and you've got a can of Carling or any other alcohol, you won't be arrested. It's legal. But it's also a depressant drug, and you have to take into account the short-term effects of this depressant drug, okay? You can get blurred vision if you become drunk, your reactions are slow, and you get lowered inhibition. And these can make you far more likely to have an accident. In the long term, if you keep drinking a lot of alcohol over many years, you can cause yourself to have brain damage, and you can even cause cirrhosis of the liver, which means the liver becomes highly scarred and inflamed, it swells up, and therefore it's far less efficient at cleaning your blood. Okay? You cannot live without your liver. Now, if we take a look at the sort of question you can be asked in your exam, it says The graph shows results from a study of the risk of having an accident with different amounts of alcohol in the blood. Describe the trend in the data shown in the graph. Use your scientific knowledge to explain the trend. Now, something that is really important here, okay? I'm going to take the pen and try this. I've never done this before. Is it asks you to describe the trend, okay, in the data. Now, my advice here is to always use numbers, okay? Always use numbers. So we're always going to use numbers. Okay, forget that. Always use numbers. Okay, so if we have a look at the answer that the pupil has put, it says, as blood alcohol increases, the risk of being involved in an accident increases. We can see that from here. As the amount of alcohol concentration in the blood goes up, the risk of an accident also goes up. Okay, we can see that there's a correlation. The pupil has then gone to say that the risk of having an accident with 0.21 grams per litre of blood is around 30 times greater than with no alcohol. So if we look, this is at 30. With no alcohol, it's more than zero, but not much. Okay? So the pupil has said that there is 30 times the risk when you have got alcohol in your blood. They've used numbers. Okay? They've then gone on to say that alcohol is a depressant. This means that it slows down your reactions, so you take longer to make a decision. This would increase the risk of an accident. Okay? This is really important. This is the fact that they've noticed there's a correlation. They've used numbers from the graph to explain it. When it says use the graph, always give numbers. And then they've used their scientific knowledge to explain what alcohol is and how in the short term that can increase your risk of an accident. That's what's said down here. It says your explanation should use your science knowledge about the effect of alcohol on the body and correct science terminology. The terminology is the fact that they've said it's a depressant, and they've also said that it slows down your reactions. So, if you'd like to pause the video here, discuss with a friend or write down some answers, and then we'll get back together in a minute and we'll go over what you've said. Okay, so the first question says, explain why it is illegal to drive with more than a certain amount of alcohol in your blood. It's 3 marks. They want you to explain. So you got 1 mark for saying that alcohol is a depressant, 1 mark. A 2nd mark for saying that depressants slow down your reactions. And a 3rd mark for saying this is dangerous when driving as it increases the chance of an accident, 3rd mark. So alcohol is a depressant, depressants slow down your reactions, 3rd mark for saying this increases your chance of an accident. Next question, between targets C to A. A large study in the UK concludes that the risk of cirrhosis increases with the amount of alcohol that is drunk. Explain how the graph above makes the conclusion from this study more reliable. So, as we saw, where is this graph? Have I not put it in? No, I have not. So, I'm sorry about that question. I didn't realise that I hadn't put it in. But, basically, well, your answer, what it shows is that if I get the pen again and draw a graph for you, what we had was a graph like this, and we had along the bottom alcohol consumption. Do you know, there's a button on the pen that keeps making it change the screen. So we've got alcohol consumption, and we've also got deaths. So death from cirrhosis. I have to keep looking how to spell it. Cirrhosis. Okay. And what we've got is a line that goes like this, a straight line, okay? Now, what you should have said is there was a study done across lots of countries, and it found that the people who drank the most alcohol were more likely to die from cirrhosis of the liver. And you would have got an extra mark for saying, for example, in France, which was up this end here somewhere, they drank 14 units of alcohol, okay? And their death from cirrhosis was 12. The unit they were given was 12 out of every 100,000 people. Whereas in Israel, there was alcohol consumption of about 2, and their deaths from cirrhosis were 4 out of every 100,000 people. So as you can see, there is certainly a trend, and you would just need to refer to the data. Okay? I'm terribly sorry about that question. I didn't realise that I forgot to scan the graphene. Okay? I am sorry. So, next part. We've looked at alcohol. Now we need to look at something called ethics. Ethics, okay? And this is where there is no right or wrong answer. You just need to think logically about any problems that you may be given. You could be asked about anything, okay? Now, ethics are what you think are right or wrong. So, ethics are what you think are right or wrong, okay? Now, as I said, this cannot have a right or wrong answer. It's what you think. So, what you think is right or wrong, okay? You could be asked anything. So, for example, ethically, I do not believe that we should test on animals. That is my belief. Now, certain people may disagree. They may say, well, as humans, we have certain needs, and therefore we need to test on animals. But for me, I think that we shouldn't. That's my point of view. So, an important point to take into account with this is that different people have different points of view. Now, I just gave the example that I do not believe testing on animals is right. However, if you were to ask a cancer scientist who is trialling new drugs for cancer on cute little rabbits and kittens, he may disagree, or she may disagree. Okay, they may say, well, no, it's absolutely essential that we test on animals. That's their point of view. But the important thing to remember here is you cannot tell someone that their point of view is wrong. Their ethical beliefs are not wrong. It's their choice. It's what they want. Okay? So, for example, you could be given a question where a patient needs a heart transplant. Okay? A patient needs a heart transplant. But there's 2 of them. Okay? There are 2 people who need the heart transplant. We could say that one of them is overweight. One of them is overweight, but young. Okay? They're overweight, but they're young. Whereas the other person, is extremely fit, and I don't mean good looking. I mean they look after themselves. They have a healthy lifestyle. So they're fit with a healthy lifestyle. But they're old. They're older. Okay? Now, you may be given a question where you're asked, should the overweight young person be given the heart, or should the fit and healthy person who is slightly older be given the heart. That is down to you. That is down to ethics. It's what you think is right or wrong. Me personally, I would give the heart to the fit older person because they are obviously going to look after themselves more. Okay, they're going to look after this heart. They value it more. Whereas somebody else may believe, such as you may believe, that the overweight young person has more years to live anyway. Therefore, they will get more out of the heart. Okay? Some people may say that regardless of their age, regardless of their lifestyle, that certain people should, everybody should, be treated equally. We should treat everybody with the same value. Now, this is ethics. There's no right or wrong answer, but you must back up any answers. Okay? So there is no right or wrong. Okay? You can't tell someone their point of view is wrong. But what I will say is back up your answers with science. So anywhere where you can use a scientific idea to back up your ethical arguments, please do. Okay? This will only add to your marks, to your answers. Now, you could be asked to see it from the point of view of someone else. Okay? You could, instead of being asked to come up from the point of view of the doctor, decide who to give it to, you could be asked to do it from the point of view of the family of the older, fitter person, or the family of the overweight, younger person. But the point is, you need to be able to justify your arguments, okay? You must always justify your arguments, okay? So let's have a look at a worked example. It says here, many patients who need a liver transplant are alcoholics, okay? They're addicted to alcohol. Remember, we spoke about cirrhosis of the liver earlier in this video, and that is why they need liver transplants. A hospital decides not to give liver transplants to patients until they have not drunk alcohol for 6 months. Question A. Discuss a reason for the hospital's decision. The pupil has put, the patient may be less likely to drink alcohol after the operation and damage the new liver they've been given, okay? They will appreciate it more. Give one ethical argument against this decision. Now, an alcoholic finds it very difficult to give up drinking alcohol. If their liver is badly damaged, they might die before they are able to control their drinking. But you may be of the ilk or of the thought that why should we give them a new liver if they're not looking after the one they've got, when we could give it to someone who's not an alcoholic who needs the liver as well? Okay, but this is ethical. This is all down to you. It says here that other answers that show an understanding of the problem will get marks. For example, in part A, you could say that giving up would reduce the addiction to alcohol, and this would make a transplant more likely to be successful. Okay? Basically, you just need to be sensible and use logic with them. Okay, at this point, I'd like you to pause the video, please, and have a go at these questions. Then, when we come back, we'll discuss the answers. Okay, so hopefully you've had a go at these questions. The first question says, a government is considering a new law to say that organs can be taken from a dead person unless they said while they were alive that they didn't want this. Give one argument for and one argument against this decision. 2 marks. For 1 mark, you could have said that there'd be more organs available for transplants. That would be a good for argument. So that would help people who need the organs. We have an organ shortage, especially in this country. An against would be that people have the right to state what is done to their body. Okay, so if they haven't said that they do want it, but they just have forgotten to say that they don't, is it right that we take their organs when they die? They may not have wanted their organs to be used. Okay, but these are the things you need to think of. Part B, explain why this is an ethical decision. So the mark scheme says, an ethical decision is one that takes into account what is right and wrong. One person's opinion may differ from another. So an ethical decision is what's right or wrong, but not everybody has the same idea of what's right or wrong. Everybody has different points of view. Okay? Part 2 for 2 marks, explain why it's difficult to evaluate an ethical decision. So it's very difficult to say that someone's more right than someone else. It's very difficult to say, well, this person's opinion is more important than that person's opinion. Okay? So people have different ideas of what's right or wrong. So 1 mark for saying that people have different ideas of what's right or wrong, and another mark for saying it's very difficult to say that someone's opinion is more important than someone else's. Okay? This is your A grade work. You need to make sure that if you're looking for grade A, you understand what an ethical decision is or what an ethical debate is. Right then. So, let's move on to the last part of this video, where we need to talk about infection, pathogens, and then we also need to look at how new drugs are tested. Okay? Now, a microorganism, I know that was going to happen at some point. A microorganism. So, microorganism. A microorganism is something that's very small, the micro part, and living organism. Okay? So a microorganism is a very small living thing. Very small living thing. Now these include things like bacteria, things like viruses, things like some fungi are microorganisms. Okay? But people seem to have this idea that all of them are bad for us. Okay, all of them are really bad. But for example, you need microorganisms, you need bacteria in your gut to live a healthy lifestyle. Now, this is where the idea of a pathogen comes in. A pathogen. Now, a pathogen is a microorganism or an organism, and microorganism that causes disease. Okay? So, for example, the flu virus is a pathogen. It passes flu to people. It causes people to have the flu. Okay? This is an example of an infectious disease. An infectious disease. Now, infectious diseases are diseases that can be passed from one person to another. Okay? So, disease that can be passed from one person to another. Okay? So, the flu virus would be an infectious disease. It can be passed from one person to another. If someone sneezes on you while they've got the flu, chances are you probably will get the flu. But our body has lots of ways in which we can stop pathogens from entering. Okay? It has lots of ways which which can stop us from being infected by pathogens. So we have our body's defenses against pathogens. Now, rather than me trying to draw this out, I've literally nicked a picture out of a book. Okay? So if we have a look at this, these are some different ways in which pathogens can get into your body. Okay? When we eat food, there can be a pathogen on the food, such as salmonella. The salmonella is a bacterium, it's a pathogen, it's a microorganism that causes disease. That can be on food, in things like chicken. When we eat it, it gets inside our body. Okay? Other pathogens, such as dysentery, can be spread by things known as vectors. Vectors. Okay? Now, vectors, if we just put this down as a keyword, a vector is not a pathogen, okay? It's not a pathogen in its own right. They carry pathogens from one person to another. So these carry pathogens from one person to another. Something that is really important here is that they are not pathogens. So these are not pathogens. They simply carry the pathogen from one person to another. So for example, mosquitoes carry malaria virus. They are vectors. The mosquito is the vector. Okay? Now, pathogens can get into your body by being injected directly into your blood. So as I just said, the malarial protozoan by mosquito vector. So the mosquito is the vector. The malarial protozoan is the pathogen that gets delivered by the vector. We can breathe in for certain pathogens through the air, through our nose and through our mouth, and that's how we get things like colds from coughs and sneezes. We can drink water that contains pathogens, so such as the cholera bacteria. We can exchange bodily fluids, which can pass pathogens on. So, for example, if you're a drug addict, or not even a drug addict, if you're taking things like heroin or steroids and you use infected needles, that can cause pathogens to get into your body, as well as sexual intercourse. Sexual intercourse, of course, bypasses your skin and allows things like the HIV virus to get into your body. Now, direct contact with infective surfaces, such as athlete's foot. Okay, this can cause problems such as athlete's foot. Now, if we look at a worked example of that, it says that malaria is a disease that affects humans. Identify the organism that causes the disease and explain how it's spread. Okay? The pupil has said that malaria is caused by a pathogen. Don't worry about the protozoan bit. It's caused by a pathogen. But it's carried by a vector, which is mosquitoes. Okay? When the mosquito bites a human, the pathogen gets into the blood. Okay? Now, be careful and not getting vectors and pathogens mixed up. Okay? So let's have a quick look at some of your body's defenses for itself. Okay? So the body's defense against pathogens. So your body has various defenses against pathogens. If we just improve this B, because it looks terrible. Now, you have two types of defense against pathogens. Okay? Your body has something called physical barriers. So these are the actual things that stop pathogens from getting inside of your body. And it also has chemical defenses. Okay, defenses. Now, the physical barriers include things like your skin. Your skin provides a cover over your body that physically stops pathogens getting inside of you. Okay? But your airways always produce something called mucus. So, for example, when you breathe in a pathogen, the pathogen goes down your airways and gets stuck in mucus. So if that's your airway, your body will produce lots of mucus, like so, into which the pathogen gets stuck and it can't get out. So the pathogens will be stuck in this mucus, you cough it out, and then the pathogen is no longer inside of you. Okay? Something quite interesting is if you blow your nose and you have clear snot coming out of your nose, you're probably not ill. It's probably your body trying to get rid of something that's irritated it. But if your snot or your mucus is green, that is actually caused by cells that have been killed, and therefore you have a virus or you have a pathogen inside of you. Another thing that we have is cilia. Now, cilia are little hairs that move mucus up your airway, okay? So these are little hairs that move mucus out of the airway and remove pathogens in the process. Okay? So your body pushes this mucus out, you cough it out, the pathogens are trapped inside the mucus and it gets rid of it. Okay? These are all physical barriers. These stop the pathogens actually getting in to your body or into the important parts. So your skin prevents pathogens going inside. Mucus traps any pathogens found inside your airway, and cilia physically push the mucus back up to your mouth or your nose where you can spit it out or blow your nose, physically getting rid of these pathogens. Now, chemical defenses include the hydrochloric acid, so hydrochloric acid in your stomach. So any pathogens that are on your food are killed by the hydrochloric acid in your stomach when you swallow the food. Other things include lysozymes. Lysozymes. Now, lysozymes are enzymes found in your tears that kill any bacteria trapped in your eyes. So there's my drawing of a teardrop. If there's any pathogens inside your eyes, so we've got some pathogens that are inside your eyes, they will be killed by lysozymes. Okay, in the tears, they'll break it down, and then when they leave your body, they've been killed. Okay? Now, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to pause the video, and I'd like you to have a go at these questions, please, and we'll come back together in a moment and discuss them. Now, hopefully, you've paused the video and you've had a go at those questions, but let's have a look at them. First question says, state 5 different ways in which pathogens can be spread. For each one, give an example of its disease which is spread that way. So you could have said that pathogens are spread through water, therefore we drink the water and we get ill, and an example of that would be cholera, 1 mark. By the air, so for example we breathe in the flu virus, 2nd mark. So 2nd mark for saying we can catch diseases like the flu through the air. By direct contact, so things like athlete's foot, which you catch by walking on surfaces barefoot. 4th mark for saying by bodily fluids, so such as HIV, through sexual interaction you can catch HIV. Bless me. And by vectors. By vectors is the 5th mark, so such as malaria. Okay, so 1 mark for saying in water, such as cholera. 2nd mark for saying by the air, such as the flu. 3rd mark by saying direct contact, which can cause athlete's foot. 4th mark by saying in bodily fluids, such as HIV through sexual interaction. And 5th mark for saying by vectors, things such as malaria. Second question says, a guide to the outdoors recommends boiling water collected from a stream before drinking. Explain why. So you've got 1 mark for saying stream water may contain pathogens. So there may be pathogens such as cholera in the water. And 2nd mark for saying if you boil the water it will kill the pathogen and therefore you're less likely to get infected if you drink it. Third question, which is a target grade B, says explain why a large cut in the skin should be covered with a dressing, but a large bruise does not need covering, 2 marks. So 1 mark comes from saying the skin is a barrier and therefore if it is cut a pathogen can get inside. 2nd mark comes from saying a bruise does not break the skin, therefore the pathogen cannot get in. So 1 mark for saying a cut can allow a pathogen to enter the body. 2nd mark for saying a bruise does not break the skin, therefore a pathogen would not be able to get inside the body. Okay? Final part of this video, we need to look at this idea of antiseptics and antibacterials or antibiotics. Okay? So if we just quickly reset the screen. So. Antibacterials or antibiotics. Antibiotics or antibacterials. Okay? Antibacterials are defined as chemicals that stop bacterial pathogens. So chemicals that stop bacterial pathogens. Now, the important point here is that they only stop bacterial pathogens. They do not stop viruses. Okay? So they do not stop viruses. They only stop bacteria. Okay? Bacterial pathogens. We can take these to stop us getting infections from bacteria. So various plants make chemicals that stop this. For example, garlic has lots of chemicals in them that stop bacteria. Tea has things in them called tannins which stop the growth of bacteria. Okay? Now, an antibiotic is a chemical that we can take. It's a drug that can be taken to stop bacteria growing. Okay, so antibiotics are chemicals that can stop bacteria growing. Okay, antifungal drugs are what stop fungus from growing. So antifungal drugs stop fungus from growing. So these stop fungus from growing. Okay? These stop fungus from growing. Antiseptics, on the other hand, antiseptics are chemicals that can kill. So, chemicals used to kill pathogens on surfaces. Okay? So, antiseptics kill pathogens on surfaces. Now, we can study the growth of pathogens or the growth of microorganisms in something called a Petri dish. Okay? A Petri dish is like a small plastic see-through dish into which we put something called agar jelly. Okay? Now, agar jelly is a substance. So it's a substance that contains nutrients needed for microbes or bacteria to grow. So if we give bacteria some agar, if we've got some agar jelly, what can I use for agar? Let's see what this looks like. So if we've got some agar jelly on a Petri dish, like so, okay, and we put some bacteria on there, the bacteria will have everything it needs to grow. Okay, the bacteria will grow perfectly. So if I just neaten up these edges with the pen, it'll have everything it needs to grow. So this agar contains all of the nutrients the bacteria need to grow. Okay, so that would be our agar jelly. This would be our Petri dish. Okay, so we've got our Petri dish. Okay, now we could be testing some different antibiotics. Okay, we could be testing one antibiotic here, and we could be testing another antibiotic over here. I'll do that in a different colour actually, so you can tell. And we'll be testing another antibiotic here. Now, if we were looking at a Petri dish with agar jelly on, and we didn't put any antibiotics on, the dish would become full of pathogens. It would become full of microorganisms, and they would just grow until the dish was full. But by placing these two antibiotics on here, we would probably see a ring around each antibiotic where the bacteria hasn't grown. Okay, so you'd get a ring around this antibiotic where the bacteria has been stopped from growing, the antibiotic has killed them, and you'd get a ring around this antibiotic. Okay, but the size of the ring tells us how good that antibiotic is at stopping the growth of the bacteria. Okay? So we can say that the size of the clear zone around an antibiotic tells us how good it is at killing the pathogen. So the bigger the area, the bigger the clear area around the antibiotic we're testing, the better it is at killing the pathogen. Okay? So the problem we've got is that we can grow things known as antibiotic resistant bacteria. So antibiotic resistant bacteria. Okay? Now, antibiotic resistant bacteria are bacteria which are not killed by antibiotics. And it's actually the overuse of antibiotics which is creating antibiotic resistant bacteria. So by using lots of antibiotics, we're creating these antibiotic resistant bacteria. Now, let me explain how this is happening. Okay, I need to just quickly wipe the board. Now, this is certainly your A-star work. Okay, traditionally pupils get this quite wrong. So I want you to imagine that we've got some bacteria, okay, and they're living comfortably in their environment. Okay, so these are our bacteria. Then, due to a mutation, now remember, a mutation is a change in an organism's DNA. So due to mutation, which happens randomly, so a mutation is a change in an organism's DNA. So a change in DNA. Due to a mutation, we have created one bacteria that is resistant to antibiotics. And I'm going to show that by putting a red dot in the middle. Okay? So due to a mutation, there are antibiotic resistant bacteria. Okay? So due to a mutation, which is by chance, it is resistant to antibiotics. Now, if we left this bacteria, it may not get enough food or enough space in order to survive, and therefore it would die on its own. But by using antibiotics on this group of organisms, so we're going to use some antibiotics, use antibiotics, what is actually going to happen is all of the other bacteria are going to die, and all we're going to be left with is the one that is resistant to antibiotics. Now, because all the other bacteria have died, this single bacterium with antibiotic resistance has all of the food and all of the space to itself. What it can now do is it can start to multiply on its own, it can start to divide, and this is known as asexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction. This is where the organism just clones itself. Okay, does not need a sexual partner. So reproduction, just adjust the pen. Reproduction where fertilization doesn't happen. Okay, we have asexual reproduction. Essentially, this bacterium with the antibiotic resistance clones itself, like so. Okay, we get lots of it. It starts to double its numbers. It starts to become more of itself. And these all have this antibiotic resistant gene now. So if we were to use this antibiotics on these bacteria, antibiotics would no longer work, okay, because they all have this antibiotic resistant gene. So the antibiotics no longer work. This is what MRSA is. When you hear of people going into the hospital and getting MRSA, it's an infection caused by these antibiotic-resistant bacteria. So we start with a group of bacteria. There is a chance mutation. A mutation is a change in the DNA. One of the bacteria has its DNA changed just by chance that it is now resistant to antibiotics. If we then use antibiotics on this population, all of the other ones will die, leaving the antibiotic-resistant bacteria on its own. This antibiotic-resistant bacteria now has all of the food, all of the space to itself. Therefore, it divides, it clones itself. That's how bacteria reproduce. They do asexual reproduction. There's no fertilization. They just clone themselves. There's then a population of bacteria that have this gene. Antibiotics no longer work on them. Okay, if I can just clean that up. So it no longer works on them. If we hadn't used these antibiotics to begin with, this resistant bacteria would have probably died through starvation. It may not have got the nutrients it needs, or it may not have had space to reproduce. But because we've killed all of the other bacteria, this one bacteria with the antibiotic resistance now has all the space and nutrients it needs to reproduce. Okay? So, for the final time in this video, let's have a look at this. If you'd like to pause the video and explain what's happening, and then we'll go over the answers when you come back. Okay, so hopefully you've paused the video there and you've had a go at these questions, but let's go over them now. First question says, look at the agar plate illustrated above. Identify which antibiotics was the most effective at killing the bacteria and explain your answer. So if you look really closely, you've got clear areas around which the bacteria didn't grow. So we're looking for the one that was the most effective. So you should have said that antibiotic B was the most effective. 1 mark. This is your identify part. You now need to explain your answer. Now your second mark comes from saying that there was a bigger clear area around antibiotic B than there was around antibiotic A. So 1 mark for saying antibiotic B, 1 mark for saying because there was a bigger clear area. Okay. Second question says, studies show that more patients in hospitals are infected with MRSA than people out in the community. Suggest why this might happen. So this is your grade C to A. You'd get 1 mark for saying that people in hospital are closer to people who are ill and are therefore more likely to catch diseases. Okay? So 1 mark for saying people who are being treated with different kinds of antibiotics are more likely to be closer together. So people in a hospital are more likely to be closer together with people who already have bacteria in them. Therefore, there is a greater chance that bacteria already resistant to one antibiotic will come into contact with other antibiotics. So you're going to have people in a hospital who have already been given antibiotics, like we spoke about here. That's going to kill all the other bacteria in them, apart from the ones who are resistant to that antibiotic. They're going to grow, and then you're going to do it again with a different antibiotic and a different one and a different one, and eventually you're going to be left with MRSA. You're going to be left with bacteria that are resistant to all types of antibiotics. Okay, so we've got one more video left, and then we have covered B1. B1 will be done after the next video, or maybe next 2 videos, I'm not sure yet. Okay, but I hope this has been helpful. Please have a go at the exam questions and the flashcards I set you to go along with this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Okay, bye.